Hey, it is exactly 8:30, Tuesday, February 19th, and welcome to week 3 of Introduction to Criminal Law. And I'm Professor Richard Wright, and I'm going to spend the next good part of an hour or less going over the details of the assignments that we have for the week. And then I'm going to talk to you about a few things that I noticed that in grading weeks 1 and week 2 that I want to, week 1 anyway, bring to your attention. I'll be grading week 2 in the next day or two. First of all, let's start by sharing my screen. As you can see, again, I'm going to, let me put this up here. There we go. I remind you that how important rubrics are. Many of you miss the idea of the rubrics. In terms of completing assignments for week 1, what many of you did wrong was you didn't pay close attention to the rubric. I suggested that you write at least 1 page for each of the 3 scenarios. I also, and for a total of 3 pages. I also indicated to you that you needed citations in the body for each scenario. And then references at the end for, not each scenario, but references at the end of the 3rd scenario. And I indicated that you run your papers through Grammarly, which most of you did. You did pretty good with that. But your APA requirement, again, the basic part, there are other parts to it, is cover page. You can use Noodle Bib, your Noodle tools. I showed you about those during week 1 in the open house, where to find that information. Also, we have a location here on the course homepage that allows you to go in and see guides. And here's the guide right here. If you clicked on this link, it will lead you to what you need to know about APA. And then I stated very clearly that it's not citations or references, it's citations and references. There should be a separate reference page for your papers. So many of you lost 5 points because you didn't have citations in the body, but you provided references at the end. But it is important that you recognize you're going to lose your points if you don't. So as I'm going to be grading week 2, I'm going to be looking for that. So if some of you want to, before I've graded them, going ahead and corrected that, that's fine. But I will be grading them this week, hopefully try to get them completed by Friday or Saturday at the latest, so that you will have them heading for week 3 assignments, which we're going to talk about today. But I'm reminding you that you're going to lose points. I said this in the open house about how important APA is and how important the rubric is. Make sure rubrics are capitalized. And then your critical thinking in terms of your paper providing details analysis, and I provided you a link. If you want to know about critical thinking, take a look at the video. So you want to maximize your points for these next 4 weeks that are left, week 3, week 4, 5, and 6. And you want to make sure that you get those done, all right? Because this week you're going to have, as a written assignment, a quiz. It's like your midterm, basically, and I already talked about this in the open house. It's going to cover modules 1, 2, and then the module today that we're talking about. All right? So anyway, very important that you take note of those things and correct those issues. If you have any concerns, reach out to me And if I see that you need tutoring, I'll refer you to tutoring. Again, this is week 3 lecture. It's taking place now, and again, every Tuesday from 8:30 to 9:30. And then at the and the link for the live lecture is right here. Rasmussen.webex.com/meet/Richard.Wright. And if you copy and paste this up to your browser, you'll be able to come to where we are right now. All right. Of course, so if you're going to get the recording and you missed the live lecture, you're not going to go there. You're going to go to the links that I provide for each week. And you'll notice that they're all YouTube links, but they're not the same link, so that you get that clear. All right. This same information is included in the announcement as well as in the course calendar. So having said that, let's go to our week 3 announcement. Last week we talked about crimes against property. So today we're going to be talking about crimes against persons. And I sent you the PowerPoints for chapters 4, 5, and 6 of your text, A Brief Introduction to Criminal Law. And that will help you as a study guide for the week. And those PowerPoints are very important to help you get a summary of what's in the chapter. So if you don't have a chance to go back and reread them as you prepare for your quiz for this week. And then I would recommend going through these activities: homicide, battery, domestic violence, sexual assault crimes, and then study those key terms. And then for practice, special circumstances, homicide classification, and above all, the practice quiz. As I said before in the open house, I said it in week 2, these little pieces, activities are not graded, but they are beneficial in helping you to learn the material in each week's module, which is very critical. This course is a lot of terminology, and I try to break it down for you. I give you some examples and illustrations, and I try to make it as clear as possible to help you to understand the content of the materials that you have for the week. And then your discussion assignment: what type of homicide is this? Your initial post is due tonight at 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. That's February 19th. And then your reply post is due this Saturday, which is the 23rd by 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then finally, your reply post, about back first the discussion before I get to the written assignment, you are encouraged to reply to more than one post. And I appreciate it also when you have citations and references as well in the post. Finally, you have the written assignment, spousal rape, which I'm going to go over the requirements for that specifically in a few minutes when we look at the module and when we look at the rubric for that. And then finally the quiz, I said, which is time, and I've already explained it to you. Look at this as a midterm, because you only have 2 quizzes in this course. One is week 3 and the other is week 6. Okay, and then I've already explained to you my motto earlier. So let's take a look at the course calendar real quick. Again, here we are right here at the 19th. It tells you your initial post, tells you that your lecture is taking place. The 23rd, as I said earlier, is when your reply post is due. And then Sunday, this Sunday, the 24th, is when your quiz is due. And then your written assignment, which I'm going to go through in detail in just a minute. Just so you know, some students say, it's not a lot of information on the calendar. Yeah, it is. You just have to click on it. For example, tells you live lecture. You click on that, and it gives you my link again, and it tells you, what we're going to cover. And then your initial post, you click on that. It gives you the title of it. It tells you when it is due there. And then the quiz, it tells you it's a time quiz. I don't put a lot of details on that because I already stressed what that is all about. Your written, I'm sorry, I did that save quiz again. Your written assignment. Oh, let's see, I keep hitting that. I don't know why. Let's see, that's the quiz. Save. Okay, I don't know. That should say written assignment. But anyway, you have a written assignment. Your written assignment is due also on that 24th as well. And we're going to go over that written assignment, okay? So you want to make sure that you also provide your keyword, which I'm going to provide to you at the end or sometime during this lecture and then at the end, so that you'll need to get your 5 points, keeping in mind that with the correct keyword on the 24th, by the end of the day, you'll get 5 points. If you do it Monday, it's going to be 4 points. If you do it Tuesday, it's going to be 3 points. If you do it Wednesday, it's going to be 2 points. If you do it Thursday, it's 1 point. If you do it Friday, no points. So anytime after that. So it's very important. But the key thing is that you want to look at the lecture before you do your assignments for that week. So you really should actually be ready to do your assignment when it comes to the 24th. And that's why the lecture is on Tuesday, and I will have the recording to you by the end of tonight as well, or early morning at the latest. All right? So now let's get to Module 3, Crimes Against Persons. Again, going over the assignments, your initial post, and you're going to follow these 2 bullet points. Place yourself as an investigating officer dealing with a criminal charge that you recommend against James, first-degree murder, involuntary manslaughter, or voluntary manslaughter. What's interesting about this whole concept is that generally it is not the investigating officer that determines the charges. On the practical side, just so you'll know, it is the prosecutor who determines the charges. But they're giving you a chance to step in there. That's the only issue I take with this, is that it's not, in the real world, it's not the police officer that determines the charges. It is the prosecutor that determines what the charges are. And so you're going to explain which of the criminal law is applicable in this case and why the others are not. So if you decide that first-degree murder, based on all the facts here, then you're going to provide the definition or of first-degree murder. You can even use your jurisdiction, but you can find that information too in your guide that we have here that you utilize for criminal law in this course as well. But then your reply post, which is due Saturday, all 3 criminal, considering all the potential charges, explain why you feel more strongly about one of the crimes being successful as opposed to the other. And that's it, all right? Now, your written assignment here has 2 parts to it, all right? 2 parts. Remember, the first one that you had was a 3-part, and then last week you had identity theft and the poster, which, by the way, I'm going to tell you something that happened to me. I'll tell you at the end. Try to remember if I forget regarding identity theft. I'll try to remember it. But I became the victim of identity theft this past week, and I'll explain it to you. Very interesting thing that happened to me. So anyway, so this is a two-part assignment. Part one is to examine the type of crime using this scenario. And then you're going to do a minimum of 2 pages, not counting the reference page or the cover page. And you're going to deal with each of these 3 points here. All right? And then part 2, conduct the interview. I recommend that you separate your paper part 1 and then part 2. Now you can do 1 page for each one, or you can do a smaller portion, but I do recommend that you make sure, it usually generally takes about at least a page to cover the issues that we put together for these assignments, at least. And then in part 2, conduct the interview. And then you have resources, like I said, the guides to help you. And then if you open these guides, it'll help you with your weekly assignment. There's a library so that you can get credible resources so you don't use things like Wikipedia, as I had a student to use. I don't know if it was in this course or another. The whole paper was Wikipedia, and they got a 0. You're going to lose points if you use Wikipedia. We tell you that up front. It's in the rubric as well. So that's the assignment. All right, so now let's go and look and see what the rubric says. Reminding you when it's due, and here is the rubric. And this is part 1. Tells you exactly what I just told you. Then part 2. Now part 1, okay, I stand corrected. Part 1 is 2 pages. Part 1 is 2 pages, not 1 page. So it's really going to be 3 pages. And then the second part should be a minimum of 1 page. So it should be 3 total pages all together to make it clear to you. And then follow this information here. Make sure you have citations and references, the APA format, which I talked about already, no Wikipedia, and so forth. All right? For spousal rape. It's spelled there, but you know what it is. So there it is. In this part, a short paper addressing in a minimum of 2 pages. That's what it is. And then this one is a minimum of 1 page. So there it is right there. All right. So I want to make sure that you get that too. Professor Wright, you said 2 pages. 2 pages for part 1, 1 page for part 2. Make sure that you do that. Make sure you have citations in the body and references at the end. You can put them at the end of part 2, or you can put them at the end of part 1 and then some more for part 2. But I recommend that you put your reference page at the end of part 2. Of course, your citations should be in the body. Now, remember what you're going to be doing during this interview. You're going to interview this person to obtain a written statement. And her husband isn't present and is not returned home. During the interview, it's important that you ask her detailed and sensitive questions about what happened in order to determine what criminal elements have been met. And it's going to be based on this fact pattern. All right? So this is the fact pattern. All right? That should be clear. That's as clear as I can give it to you, and I've already given you the deadlines. Okay? And then I repeat it to you again, the quiz. Is, of course, you have to abide by the academic misconduct policy. There should be no materials. This is a closed book exam, so you want to make sure that you do that. We're not there to monitor you, but we can certainly tell based on how well a student generally does. Sometimes they don't finish the exam. Well, one of the reasons you don't finish is because of the fact that you are trying to sift through materials. That's a violation of the academic policy, and we don't want you doing that, okay? Remember, we talked about ethics during week 1, so we want you to carry that out. And then, of course, your live classroom, which you're going to provide your keyword. And that's it for the assignments for this week. So let's go back into and look at the lesson content, where we're going to spend the rest of our time talking about crimes against persons, and we're going to deal with voluntary, involuntary manslaughter, justifiable homicide, the difference between simple battery and substantial battery, and then we're going to deal with a little bit about domestic violence laws and the degrees of sexual assault crimes. Again, your reading is chapters 4, 5, and 6. So we're going to start out by discussing this section on homicide, battery, domestic violence, sexual crimes. And then I'm just going to quickly take you through and show you what you need to do here. These are exercises starting with key terms, when it says for practice, especially the quiz. But all of this helps you to get ready for the exam, okay? So what is homicide? What is homicide? As I said last week, that crimes against property, the penalty is not as severe because we value life. And so homicide is simply stated, as it says here, is killing someone, another person killing a person. Now, and there could be lawful or either unlawful, but it's still homicide. So if you, anyway, we'll go down and we'll talk about this. But dealing with the issues, the most, and you know what, these degrees of murder sometimes are voluntary manslaughter. So it depends on the jurisdiction. So basically, when we talk about murder, using the term first degree murder here as it's here, using a statute as in Minnesota, as I said, if you kill somebody, a human being, and you did it premeditated, that means that you planned it, you thought it out, you planned it, you went and got a gun, you went shot and killed that person. That's what we call first degree murder. We call that cold-blooded, but it's with malice and a forethought. That's a term that you'll run across. Malice and a forethought. It means that, again, you plotted it. There's a thing called mens rea, which means the state of mind at the time you committed the offense was one towards violence and an intention not to injure that person, but to kill that person. Okay? Now it says first degree murder is set apart from other degrees because the killer demonstrates both premeditation, that is forethought and planning, and the intention. So it's not accidental. All right? And so so we always say with malice and a forethought. So basically it's planning. That's the most simplest way for me to describe it. I can get into the details, but I don't want to give you all of that. You go to law school, you'll get that as I got it. And then if you ever represent somebody as a lawyer, I represented many people in first degree murder cases. The charge was based on all of those elements taking place. All right? Now, they give some examples here, like if it was determined that the killer had told another person of their intent and in fact carried out the action, then that would be support intent. So the bottom line is intent is based on the actions. I'm going to go kill so-and-so, so-and-so, and then you go kill them. That will be sufficient intent. All right? Even if you don't tell somebody and you go ahead and do it, then it's based on the obvious fact that or if you tell somebody they're going to die and then you fire a gun or stab them or do whatever it is that causes their death. Now, it says it's clear that the act was intentional as opposed to accidental. discharge of a firearm that caused death. So motive could be uncovered to show that the person intended to kill. For example, an email or something, or a letter, or like I said, a mere statement, and that kind of thing. Okay. Now, that's first-degree murder. All right. Now, let's go to second-degree murder. Now, it's the lesser included offense. In Illinois, we have first-degree and second-degree murder, but second-degree murder is almost akin to what we call voluntary manslaughter. It says that the person knowingly caused the death of a person. Now, second-degree murder, you don't have to have premeditation, but it's at how you were at the time of the act itself. But it has to be intentional, keeping in mind. And as I already told you, second-degree murder is also known as voluntary manslaughter. And like I said again, there is no intent. A heat of passion occurs when a person, under ordinary circumstances, has irresistible impulse, that is, lose control and kills another human being. Heat of passion is applied in a murder case when the murder happens immediately in a moment that causes irresistible impulse. It would be difficult to lessen the severity of the murder. So they give an example here. Bob came home, found his wife in bed with Jim, but he hunted Jim down the next day and killed him. That would be voluntary. That would be probably first-degree murder because he planned it. But let's say he did it after he saw it and then he just lost it. Boom. Then that would be murder, second degree, in this jurisdiction, also known as voluntary manslaughter. Okay? Remember the statute here says voluntary manslaughter is the intentional or known killing in a state of passion. The key element is a state of passion that happens. Okay? So a person loses it. They just, you use the term lose it. They lost control. That is, for example, what happened here in Illinois. There was a police officer charged with 16 counts of aggravated battery with a firearm, but Illinois has the voluntary manslaughter or second-degree murder, which says that the person, when he fired the 16 shots as a police officer, did use excessive force, but that person really kind of like lost it. That's what caused him to do that. So that person is not guilty of first-degree murder, okay? So that's the difference. Remember, passion is involved in second-degree murder, but it's not necessarily applicable. It's more planning and plotting, okay? And then we have special circumstances. I'll spend just a little time. Adequate provocation, coercion, and then, you know, you're dealing with affirmative defenses in these special circumstances. So you're going to be able to review that when you go over the little exercises that are at the end of this lecture that I'm recommending that you take time to go through. But usually they're dealing with first-degree homicide involving special circumstances. There are aggravated things that are brought up at the time of the sentence, and that could sometimes lead to the death penalty if there's death penalty in that jurisdiction. Second-degree homicide, adequate provocation and coercion. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that. So you can basically, what it amounts to is that there were some factors that lessen the offense. That's pretty much what it says here. So that that person may not qualify for the death penalty, but might get life. Then, of course, some jurisdictions don't have death penalty, and they do have life. So now let's get to involuntary manslaughter. I already told you about voluntary. It means what it says. It means it's not voluntary. There's no premeditation. There was no intent, such as driving recklessly a car and you kill a person, then that person is going to be guilty of what we call involuntary manslaughter, as opposed to running a car over someone purposely to kill them. That's when we get to first-degree murder. But then reckless homicide is intoxication or drugs, driving under, and a person is killed. And or dealing with like speeding, or if you, for example, now, if you, for example, as happened in Indiana, 3 kids were killed when a lady went around the school bus after the sign was out, and she went around and killed them. She was not charged with first-degree murder, but involuntary manslaughter, because she operated for utter disregard or indifference of the life. So in contrast, reckless means indifferent or careless to the welfare of other people. So basically the point of the matter is that the levels of recklessness can be used based on utter disregard, utter indifference, which is first degree, or reckless act, which is second degree. So you do something, it's almost like accidental, but it's not, it's above accidental. So which degree of involuntary manslaughter? Now, what do you mean by that? Here's, read the following case and consider which degree. Now look at what I'm talking about, what they're talking about, whether it's one of these above. It's 11:30 and it's clear and cold January day, and the streets are dry, and a 23-year-old male who is intoxicated, remember that, operates his vehicle at on the road at 25 miles an hour, which is fine. His girlfriend Jane is seated next to him. She's also intoxicated. He decides to impress Jane and accelerates to 80. He drives through a stop sign and collides with another vehicle occupied by a middle-aged couple who are killed instantly. So the question is, did Jim demonstrate utter disregard for human life, or were his actions merely reckless? No, he's utter disregard for human life. And the death of probably, if Jane was killed, I don't know if she was, but the middle-aged couple, it says, were killed, so we're not going to speculate that. Then in that case, then it's based on what we said, utter disregard for human life. He didn't think, he didn't care, he didn't think about his actions. He was just doing something that was irresponsible. Now, one-punch homicide is, for example, if you're fighting somebody and the fight is involving a battery, but we're not going to get into the context of battery now, but you hit that person and it's just one punch, and that person falls, hits their head, or even the punch itself results in death, then that could end up being involuntary manslaughter as well. Now, that doesn't apply in boxing, because there's a tort theory called valenti non fit injuria, and it's Latin, which means that the actions fit the injury. If you're in a boxing ring, you're supposed to get hit, okay? And that's what that's all about. But there's clips in here that you can take time to look at, and I'm not going to put them in here. And then these are the references at the end here that are used for them. All right? So I want to close this, close this, close this, close this, and this. Okay, so now I want to go to the next issue, battery. Battery. Now, battery is very simple. Battery is very simply the elements, an act done on purpose to injure a person that results in injury, and they didn't consent to it. So the question is, if an individual consents to you hitting them, is that a battery? If the person has the right state of mind and they do it, it's probably not going to be a battery. But it's a dangerous practice, and you could end up finding yourself in an involuntary manslaughter situation if that person ends up dying, and or you can end up with aggravated battery if that person is seriously injured. So batteries occur quite frequently. You hear assault and battery used together. Assault means that you anticipate being hit. Battery is the conclusion of the matter when the person is actually hit. And it says here, not to confuse you here, that in some states battery is referred to as assault. That is not good because they use that for simple battery. That's because they say assault and battery. It says an unlawful force of violence which causes injury. But in the common law and understanding assault, look at this. Assault creates a belief that you're about to be harmed. Doesn't involve physical contact unless the assault is specifically defined otherwise, as in the statute mentioned above. So the statute in the jurisdiction will determine it. So don't come and say, Professor, but in my jurisdiction, assault is the same as battery. That's the way it is in your jurisdiction. Each state is autonomous in terms of the statutes, that how they apply the criminal laws themselves. But battery is basically when someone strikes someone against their will and involves actual physical contact. Okay. So anyway, as I said, it varies according to the state. The seriousness or degrees of battery is determined by the injury that takes place. So then there's this thing called mayhem, which is a type of bodily harm where a person does it with malice, such as one to cut off a limb of a person, disfigure them, pour acid or hot water or something on them, or cuts them, and those kinds of things. That's when we get to mayhem. But generally, you'll have aggravated battery used in those jurisdictions, pretty much. Okay. Domestic violence. Now, you will be, again, all of these crimes that I'm talking about so far, by the way, just talking about battery itself, simple battery, in most jurisdictions is a misdemeanor. But when you use something that elevates it to aggravated battery, such as a weapon or something that you use a strike to strike that person, or if you're like a karate person registered, if you're a boxer or something like that, it rises because your hands are considered as weapons themselves, so that elevates it to aggravated battery. So that's all I want to say about that. So now we deal with something that is very dear to me, not for a good reason, but domestic violence. And it is a crime that takes place in relationships. It doesn't have to be a husband and a wife. It could be a civil relationship, a common law relationship where the parties live together and one person is assaulted by the other person in the course of the relationship. That's what happened with my mother, as you heard me tell my story when I gave it during week 1, and I saw it quite frequently, and it is a very, very, very serious offense, and it carries some very serious penalties, and I think that should, because that's what led me into becoming a lawyer, as you know. And that we always said that when I was in law enforcement, that one of the most difficult calls that you get, and a call that you really have to be careful on when you is a domestic violence call. The reason being is because a person can be beat up or injured or seriously injured by someone, and in fact they can call the police, and when you arrive there at the police and you start to handle that person, that other person will attack you, saying something like, "That's my man," or either the vice versa now. And then now we have, because of the LGBT situation, we have now males, male, female, female. but the fact of the matter is that they have a relationship that involves coexisting and living together. So state laws require, in order for domestic abuse to be successfully prosecuted, generally there are some elements that there must be in the context of a domestic relationship, which I've described. In most states, the domestic relationship exists of the crimes such as battery, when it occurs between two adults, at least 18 years old, who live together, that is an intimate partner, have lived together or have a child in common. They don't have to live together. They can have a child in common. And if the relationship exists, then the offense of battery would become domestic because it happened because of the relationship. And it is a offense that can result in death, as I know, and you know from my story. And many of you know always from experiences, domestic violence, unfortunately, is a crime that has taken the country by storm, and it is unfortunately not decreasing, but it's going even more with the laws. It's still just as bad, because as I explained to people, it is not papers, orders of protection, or things like that can save a life. What can save a life is individuals taking steps. I encourage people that if you're in a relationship with a person and they have to use their hands on you or something on you, go. Do not listen to them saying, because there's a cycle of abuse, which I'm not going to get into. You have to take the domestic violence course that says that generally what happens after that is the person will come back and try to say, I lost control, I didn't mean to do it. The next time he might, or she might, or they might lose control, so that you end up not being able to come back, and that they're having your funeral. So very devastating to families again. All right. It can take many forms, including physical, sexual assault, and emotional and economic harm. And in most cases, when law enforcement is called to a domestic violence incident, it says physical abuse or battery takes place, generally. Although the definition is broadly defined, and it's more specific from a criminal law perspective. So when we're investigating domestic violence incidents, you have to determine if the act occurred within the context of a domestic relationship. All right? It could be a violation of the law, but then there are it's more severe if it's domestic in nature. So it says two adults, at least 18 years of age, who live or have lived together or have a child in common. Now, let me say this to you. Be aware that in some jurisdictions, and I think that with the advent now that people are starting to, as I use the term, shack, live together, or either get married earlier than 18 years of age, that is taken into consideration in some jurisdictions, and I think that actually there needs to, I haven't looked at the statutes, but that needs to be addressed. I do know now that they're gender neutral now. It used to be male against female because that's primarily who was doing it. But now it's male against male, female against female, female on male, male on female, as has occurred many times. And that's pretty much what I want to say. There are other issues that are involved with domestic violence and what the police officer must do and so forth, okay? There's special rules for domestic violence when the batterer or the individual charged with domestic violence is a law enforcement officer for obvious reasons. They have a weapon. And so there's some very serious repercussions that take place there. It is so important, guys, as I talk about the code of silence, that you have to recognize your job is to be neutral when it comes to dealing with if it's a colleague or a police officer that you find out as a police officer or something like that that's involved, you still have to follow the procedures that your agency has established and your jurisdiction has in terms of law. But there are some videos and articles that you can look at yourself on your own time. Okay? And so we come to, I think this is the last, this is the last part, dealing with sexual assault crimes. Now, we are in the Me Too movement where sexual assault seems to be. You see this picture here of a hand that says no. I have heard it said, well, she said no, but she didn't mean it. No. No means no. It's only two letters. No. And then talks about at common law it was unlawful intercourse with a male with a female other than their wife without their consent. But today it's more appropriately referred to as sexual assault. And I said already that it is gender neutral for the reasons that I stated previously. And sexual assault doesn't require that you actually have sex, but that includes an unlawful touching, however slight, of any part of the genitalia of the individual and without their consent. Now, we're not talking about married people, okay? Because there's some special processes involving that if you're married and separated, those kinds of things. But also if you use violence in the situation. But sex crimes are very sensitive, and a crucial role that law enforcement play is to help the victims get some help, such as advocates can help them cope with the situation. And so we're going to deal with just some of that. Now, be aware of the fact that it's very, 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 very interesting. I never defended an individual in sexual assault cases because I couldn't do them. I didn't feel comfortable because I come from a family. I have 8 sisters and no brothers. I have 6 daughters, 2 sons. I just can't do that. I refuse. It's unfair to an individual. And that's one of the areas that I did. I did have to investigate some of those as a police officer, but that was it. So dealing with sexual assault, it is very important that law enforcement protect that individual. Many individuals find themselves in situations where it's hard to even face that accuser, hard to deal with that. And then now, because we have what we call rape shield laws, protecting individuals from, before it was so difficult, individual in court, the defense attorney could use their prior sexual experiences as evidence that they might not have been assaulted. They did away with that, so you can't do that anymore. That's good too. But sexual assault is like other crimes against individuals. Statutes are categorized by degrees, 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th degree, depending on this. So they give an example here of 1st degree sexual conduct in Minnesota as an example. It says that for 1st degree, now notice what the elements are here. The younger the person is, the more severe the offense. The younger the person who's the victim. States that anybody who engages in sexual penetration of another or in sexual contact with a person under the age of 13 is guilty of 1st degree. If any of the following exists: the victim is under 13 and the defendant is more than 3 years older than the victim. So if they're like 16 years old and above. The victim is 13 to 16 and the actor is more than 4 years above and in a position of authority over that, as we get now into incest and things of that nature, or have a significant relationship such as a parent, foster parent, a teacher, a counselor. We hear a whole lot of that, people, and that's taking place, especially dealing with not parents so much in foster parents, but we hear more counselors, psychiatrists, psychotherapists, and teachers. You know about what happened with the young ladies who were gymnasts at Michigan State University, those kinds of situations. Then the circumstances at the time placed the victim in fear of physical harm. So it was forced on them. The individual may have been armed with a weapon in which they threatened to use that weapon, something along those lines. And so force or coercion, and the defendant knew that the victim was either took advantage of a mentally impaired or mentally incapacitated. You are idiot, stupid people now. I think I was most recently hearing about a guy working in a hospital where the woman was in a coma and got her pregnant. That's along those lines. That's very much messed up. And then finally, an accomplice used force or coercion with a weapon to accomplish the act. So it again, and penetration explains more in detail what's the genitals or the sex organs of an individual. Second degree is defined as the intentional touching. So you don't even have to have the act, but you actually touch or fondle. We run into that. Then the third degree, notice how it goes from there. State of Minnesota forbids a person from engaging in sexual penetration if any of the following exists. The person is under 13 and more than 3. We start to get to things what we call statutory rape. That's pretty much where we get to. And then where you're taking advantage of the individual. You may be a massage therapist and assaults the person during that time as well. Fourth degree prohibits a person from engaging in sexual conduct under the same circumstances under third degree as well. And then you get to fifth, prohibits a person from engaging in non-consensual sexuals or engaging in masturbation or lewd exhibition in front of a minor under the age of 18. So then we start talking about here specifically, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, we finish up with statutory rape. Statutory rape is what we call a strict liability offense. It is basically prohibiting intercourse between an individual under the age of 18. It can be male or female, and states vary. But one important factor is that the minimum age of consent is generally between 16 and 18, which means that if the person gives consent and they're under that age, you're strictly liable. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. It says age gap provisions exist in some states which makes it illegal for certain acts if the actors are of a certain age. But statutory rape laws, as it says here in the second paragraph, are strict liability laws, is what I said. All you have to do is show that the person intended, and the mere act of engaging in the sexual intercourse, regardless, that person they find out is underage, you're in trouble. It's never a defense to say that the minor consented or something along those lines. It's not going to fly. It's not going to fly. So I wrap up by saying that, reading this last part, and I kind of mentioned this earlier, due to the sensitive nature of sexual assault crimes, many victims don't want to come forward because of the situation. But to help this, I said there are rape shield laws which are designed to encourage victims to report crimes without the fear that their prior sexual conduct or relations will be brought up in court. An example is the defendant is not able to introduce the fact that the victim has a tolerance of engaging in sexual activity with strangers. So you can't bring that up. It's not relevant to it. And that's it for that. I'm going to remind you again to go over these key terms. And again, just quickly, because I got a couple more minutes, you click on key terms, you go to flashcards, and you operate Adobe Flash, allow it to open up, allow it, here it comes. It says, oh, there it goes. Okay, now, and it will, okay, it'll say, give you some examples. Intentional harm, intentional causing of death of one by another without premeditation, forethought or planning. You know what that is? Second-degree murder. So then you go to the next one. Factors that increase the severity of the offense, especially at the time of sentencing in death penalty cases. And you flip that over and you aggravating. And so you do each of these, okay, and you go through them. There's 21 of them. Help you to get ready for your exam. Very, very, very important. And then, aside from using those, you have, let's get down here, special circumstances. Remember I told you, I said you can go to special circumstances, click on that, and then start the activity. And then Jane and Phil have been married for 10 years and have 2 children together. Jane also has a drinking problem. Jane came home drunk and argued with Phil. Phil threatened to leave Jane and take the children if she didn't get help. Enraged, Jane shot Phil and fled the house with their children. So the question is, what special circumstances would be involved? Was it coercion or necessity, adequate provocation, future dangerousness, or vileness? So you'd have to look at, consider what's special about this. Was it out of necessity that she did this? Was it adequate provocation? Let's try it. See what it says. Then let's submit it. That's right. Adequate provocation would be likely claimed because she was so upset with Phil that he threatened to take her children. So you go to the next one, and you do the same thing as well. Out of 8 of these questions. Okay? She stabs John once with a knife while he's asleep. John survives, and Mary tells police she couldn't control herself. Work circumstances, adequate provocation, future dangerousness, vileness, or coercion or necessity. I don't know. Let's try vileness. Incorrect. Adequate provocation would most likely be claimed in this case because she was so upset that she lost control. So you have to look at all of those circumstances. All right, so you go through each of those. All right. Then, moving down to the last part. And you got classifications of homicide, which you do the same thing. Then the practice quiz. You want to make sure that whatever you do, that you don't neglect that. The intent to cause death with premeditation is considered as, right off the bat, as soon as you see premeditation, we're talking about first-degree murder. All right? And father comes home to find his daughter's 17-year-old boyfriend about to have sexual intercourse with his daughter. Outrage, out of control. The father kills the boyfriend. He's likely to say adequate provocation. Yep, because he lost control. All right, so, you know, you go through those and then you look at those. All right, so that's it for me today. I want to use as a key phrase today, I know we have crimes against persons, but I want to bring to your attention domestic violence. That's it. That's the phrase I want to use to give you the ability to get your points. So I'm going to return to class And then I'm going to say good night to each of you, and hope to see you next week. Study for that exam before you take it. And if you have any questions, you know how to reach out to me. Good night.